Hello there, friends and neighbors. Thanks so much for coming back to my channel. This is me, Stella Hendricks, and we are going to dive right into part 4 of the Dorothy Stratten story from the May 1981 Playboy. This article is the longest thing on earth. I thought I would knock it out in like 2 videos, 3, but here we are, and we'll just keep going until we're done with it, okay? That's good. What happened? Hefner asked after a long silence. Is it a murder-suicide? Hefner knew nothing of Spider's proclivity for violence, but it was the first thought that occurred to him. Not until a police officer had given him his name and badge number did Hefner fully believe that this wasn't a hideous joke, the sort of obscene prank that Spider might pull. "What have you got there?" Hefner asked. Wooding said that the investigating officer hadn't arrived yet, but it appeared to be a murder-suicide. When Hefner put down the phone, his hand was shaking. The friends in the game house were also Dorothy's friends, and the shock of what happened stunned them. The women were all crying and consoling one another. The men were shaking their heads in disbelief and cursing. Hefner decided he'd better call Peter Bogdanovich. "Something terrible has happened, Peter," he said when the call went through. "Dorothy is dead." Hefner heard a moan, heard the telephone drop. Then the line went dead. He dialed a second number at Peter's residence, and a houseman answered. Hef could hear Bogdanovich sobbing in the background. "This is Hefner again," he said. "I just wanted to make sure Peter had someone with him." Sis Rundle, who was a part-time member of the mansion staff, knew that a crisis required more experience than she had. She called Hefner's executive assistant, Lisa Loving. Sis was so upset that Lisa had trouble understanding her. She understood only that someone was dead. "My first thought was that something had happened to Hef," Lisa wrote later. "I hung up the phone, grabbed a robe to cover my nightgown, and jumped into my car. I don't think it took me 2 minutes to get back to the mansion. I ran 2 red lights. I was shaking the whole way. I left my car in the middle of the driveway with the motor still running. I ran as fast as I could to the game house. God, I was scared. Then I saw Hef. He was standing. He was okay. I went up to him and touched his arm. It was the strangest thing. It was like his skin was moving. He was shaking so hard, and he didn't look good at all. Hef put his arm around my shoulder and told me that Dorothy Stratten was dead." All the girls in the game house were crying, Lisa remembered. Sis and Victoria Cook were holding each other. Heidi Sorensen seemed to be in a daze. Lisa suggested they all go back into the house. On the way, Hefner told her what little he knew and what had happened. He wondered if he ought to call Dorothy's family in Vancouver. Lisa said the authorities would send someone to the house in person. She would see to that. Hefner, badly shaken, went upstairs. Lisa ordered hot tea from the kitchen. Told the staff to direct all incoming calls to her, and went into the dining room, where she did her best to calm the girls. Heidi, an upcoming playmate who was also from Canada, had started to cry and couldn't stop. "I told them how lucky we were to have known Dorothy in the first place," Lisa would recall. "Dorothy had touched a lot of the people there, and we were lucky to have been a part of that. She had left a great deal behind for all of us to remember." Then Sandra Theodore and Kelly Tuff arrived home after a rehearsal for the singing playmates. Lisa met them at the door. Sandra started laughing and hugged her. "This time you've gone too far, Loving," Sandra said. "Just because Hef works in his pajamas doesn't mean you can come to work in your nightgown." "Go upstairs," Lisa told them. "Hef needs you." "I didn't want them to wander into the dining room and see everyone crying," she said later. She thought Hefner was the one who should tell them the bad news. Sandra because she was Hefner's girlfriend, Kelly because she had known Dorothy since high school in Vancouver. "I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep," Lisa remembered, "and that I had a very long, hard day ahead of me. It was 4:30 a.m. and as far as I was concerned, time to start thinking Time to start waking the world of Playboy. I think I was tired of being the only one awake and working. I had never had to tell anyone about a death before, much less get them out of bed to give them the news. I called our people in New York and Chicago first, then I started on Los Angeles. Marilyn Grabowski, the head of security, the director of public relations, and on down the line. Every person I called seemed to understand what I was saying, but every one of them called me back to ask if I had really just called and to repeat what I had told them. After that, the phone never stopped ringing. Newspapers called, asking for a statement. The county coroner called, requesting information on Dorothy's next of kin. At about 8 a.m., a mansion office staffer, Judy Bradford, came in. Her eyes were still puffy with sleep. Her brother works for a radio station. He'd called her and told the news. She came immediately. I was sitting at my desk feeling a little numb. She said, "Are you still here or here again?" Then she saw that I was still wearing my nightgown. She hugged me and said, Oh God, why did this happen? Why, dear, sweet Dorothy? We held each other for a moment. I cried for the first time that long night. Early Friday morning, Royal Canadian Mounted Policeman pulled his car into Nellie's driveway in Coquitlam. She saw him through her kitchen window and watched him getting out. John, she thought as she went to her front door, what's he done? Maybe his license has expired. Something to do with the car. The Mountie knocked on the door and Nellie opened it. He stepped inside and removed his hat. "Your daughter's been shot, ma'am," he said. Nellie didn't know what to do. She went back into the kitchen and started washing dishes. The Mountie didn't know what to do either. He followed her into the kitchen and started drying them. "You mean she's dead?" Nellie said after a while. "Yes, she's dead." He didn't mention the suicide. Nellie thought, I hope they put Spider away for the rest of his life. And then and later, she thought, she was so young. Dorothy would have celebrated her 21st birthday on February 28th. She died exactly 2 years and 1 day after her arrival in LA. The staff at Playboy's West Coast photo studio began arriving well before working hours that Friday morning. Most had been awakened early by phone calls informing them of Dorothy Stratten's death. Susan Hall, Marilyn Grabowski's assistant, sat by the phone in the still darkened reception area. Marilyn called her into her office. Susan had never seen anyone look so distraught. "Someone has to take Louise back to Vancouver," Marilyn told her. "I want you to do it." Louise, little Louise, Susan thought. She'd forgotten about Louise. "All right," she said. "Tell me what needs to be done." She was told that a limousine would be waiting at the Bogdanovich home where Louise had been staying. The plane reservations had already been made and she was to leave at once. As Susan started out the door, the phone rang. It was Lisa Loving. "Louise doesn't know what's happened," Lisa said. "Her family requests that we let them tell her when she gets to Vancouver." "Okay," Susan said, staggered. Shit. She looked for something to distract the 13-year-old and found a copy of Kurt Vonnegut's Welcome to the Monkey House on a bookshelf. She also took a notebook and pens. They could draw, play dots, tic-tac-toe, anything. She reached Bogdanovich's house in minutes. The limousine was already there. The young man who took care of the children met her at the door. "You know she doesn't know," he said as he ushered her into the house. Louise was packing furiously. She turned, saw Susan, and recognized her. She glared. "What are you doing here? Where's Dorothy?" "Well, what did they tell you?" "That Dorothy had to go away and I'm supposed to go back to Vancouver." "Oh, now I know too. Well, I'm supposed to make sure you get back okay." "Why didn't she call? Nothing's happened to her, has it?" Louise was angry. "She was supposed to call yesterday." "Well, I don't know. She probably didn't have time. I don't know exactly what's going on, just that I'm to be your escort home." Louise studied Susan for a long moment, then resumed her packing. I flew down by myself. I don't need an escort, Louise announced. She studied Susan suspiciously. Is anything wrong? No, everything's okay, but we'd better hurry or we'll miss our plane. Oof, man. I don't think I could bring myself to lie in a situation like that. I might not tell her the information if I had been instructed not to, but I'm not gonna lie to the girl and say everything's okay. I'm just gonna say, honey, I have to take you home and that's all I can tell you right now. I think it's wrong to lie to children, even to comfort them. You don't have to tell them the brutal truth, but man, oof, oof. Susan would forever love Bruno, the limousine driver, for his reassuring calm. He didn't play the radio, he didn't talk. His look through the rearview mirror lent support as Louise continued to pummel her with questions. Are you sure Dorothy is safe? I'm sure. You know she went to go see Spider yesterday. I told her not to, but she wanted to go. That man is crazy. I hate him. I was afraid he'd kidnap her or something. No, she hasn't been kidnapped. And you're sure she's okay? Yes, a lot of people love Dorothy, and she will always be okay. Louise thought about that. It's not like her not to call, she said. I've been so scared. Even Peter seemed scared. This morning he looked sick. You know, Dorothy was supposed to take me shopping. At the airport, Bruno took care of the luggage and kept Louise close at hand. So far, so good. They moved through the ticket line, one agonizing step at a time. Susan noticed a woman studying Louise. Sensing trouble, she sent Bruno and Louise to sit down while she waited for the tickets. The woman approached her. That's Dorothy Stratten's little sister, isn't it? She asked. Yes, Susan said pleasantly, in the hope that she would disappear. She doesn't know what happened. Please don't say anything. I'm with Hoffman Travel, the woman said. I thought I recognized her. I saw them together when she flew in last Saturday. She said she'd do what she could to help. She made some calls, then led Louise and her escort to a VIP lounge from which the television set, radio, and all newspapers had been removed. The woman arranged for Susan and Louise to board early. The plane was cleared of newspapers, and they were seated at the front of the first-class section, with no one else seated nearby. The flight was difficult for Susan. She tried to not actually lie to Louise, but to phrase her words so that later they would have a deeper meaning. Yeah, I would probably try to do something like that. Yeah. Oof. By the time they landed, Louise seemed convinced that Dorothy was okay. Susan told her that she could call her any time. She knew that Louise was about to be wrenched from the false security that had been created for her. Then she'd be even more confused and shocked because earlier in that day, at Bogdanovich's, she'd known. They deplaned in Vancouver. Man, it seems like Louise, even as young as she was, she had more of a sense of reality than even Dorothy did. Perhaps it's because she had Dorothy as an older sister. Like, oh man, this is so sad. It's so difficult. They deplaned in Vancouver. All of Louise's family was there, and she was delighted. She hugged her brother. Nellie took Susan's hand to thank her. She looked steadily into Susan's eyes so that Susan had to look directly into hers. They were Dorothy's eyes, deep and sincere. When Louise turned away, Nellie showed her grief for just a moment. Susan would never forget that look. As Susan started toward her return flight, Louise ran after her, hugged and kissed her. Then she told Susan to take good care of herself. Dorothy's death was front page news throughout the United States, in Canada and abroad. Colleen Camp, an actress who worked with Dorothy and They All Laughed, saw her picture in an Italian newspaper in Brindisi, an Italian seaport on the Adriatic. She was traveling with director Francois Truffaut. "Why, that's Dorothy," she said. Then she noticed the word morta in the headline. In Los Angeles, the first sketchy radio reports Friday morning simply said that Playboy model and her husband had been found dead in their West LA home. By 11 o'clock, the murder had required a righteous motive. The media was reporting erroneously that police said that Spider was despondent over his wife's decision to pose nude in Playboy. Walter Cronkite set the record straight on the CBS Evening News. A beautiful young woman living what was described as a Hollywood fairy tale, Cronkite said. But a fairy tale doesn't always have a happy ending. Sometimes they turn ugly and violent. This time, say police, the tragedy apparently was written by a husband despondent over the breakup of his marriage. Incredibly, newspaper columnist Liz Smith used the occasion to attack Bogdanovich. Yeah, I don't like Bogdanovich either, but at this particular time and in this story, Bogdanovich is, not the bad guy here. He becomes bad later. Some of those who witnessed Peter Bogdanovich's ongoing love affair with Dorothy Stratten are blaming the movie director for not protecting the Playmate of the Year from being killed. Bogdanovich, everybody's favorite megalomaniac and narcissist, I added narcissist, which is true, drew almost violent reaction from one bitter insider. He knew that her husband was threatening to kill her, but he refused to back off. Personally, I think the husband shot the wrong person. The only person the husband should have shot was himself. The Chicago Tribune and others, noting Dorothy's Galaxina license plate, found the connection with the much-trafficked cliche, life in the fast lane, and condemned Playboy and Hollywood indiscriminately for Dorothy's death. A more discerning examination came from a scholar and columnist, Max Lerner, a friend of Hefner's who had known Dorothy. Lerner told their story briefly in a column that concluded, "One thinks of Dreiser's American Tragedy, but there has been a shift. The upward mobile Spider killed not the woman who stood in the way of his career, as in Clyde's case, but the one on whom his hopes for his own life had been centered. This is part of the glowing new America that has opened careers for women like Dorothy and threatens their men." I so agree with that. On Saturday, as the California Public Administrator inventoried Dorothy's possessions, Mark Goldstein hung around the house making small talk. He had ransacked the premises, finding a box full of 4-number shelves in the garage, finding papers and correspondence in drawers and closets, finding an underlined copy of Napoleon Hill's classic Think and Grow Rich, and an issue of Unity's Daily Word. Thursday's word had been, "I begin this day with a spirit of enthusiasm, knowing that all things are working together to bring forth good." "I've got her poetry in here," Goldstein bragged, patting his camera. "I've got everything on film." He had photographed the contents of Dorothy's agenda book. He took books and papers he'd collected and stashed them in his car. Okay. Bull Eldridge informed Bob Houston that Nellie wanted Dorothy buried in the United States. It was a country she had learned to love, he said, and the place where she had been most happy. Hefner sent Elizabeth Norris to Vancouver with tickets to fly Dorothy's family to LA for the funeral. Not only Nellie and Burl, Louise and John would be attending, but also Simon Hoag Stratten, the natural father whom Dorothy had wanted so much to impress, even though he had abandoned her. I add a couple of things in here. Sorry. Honestly, that guy. Hoag Stratten had first learned of his daughter's success when he read the Vancouver newspaper reporting her death. Serves you right. The family flew to Los Angeles to attend the funeral at the Westwood Memorial Cemetery. The site had been chosen by Bogdanovich. It is, coincidentally, where Marilyn Monroe's body is also interred. The funeral was held privately on Friday, August 22nd, 8 days after Dorothy's death. 4 limousines took Dorothy's family, Hefner, Bogdanovich, and his 2 daughters, Elizabeth Norris, Marilyn Grabowski, Mario Casilli, Bob Houston, her lawyer Wayne Alexander, and the agent David Wilder into the park. The gates were briefly locked for the 3:15 service. After the funeral, Nellie met Hefner for the first time. She noticed that his hands were cold and could see that he was still as shocked as she was. Mario didn't know what he was going to say. To Louise, she resolved the problem by hugging him. The minister recited the 23rd Psalm and verses from the books of John, Ephesians, and Romans. At her family's request, Dorothy's body had been cremated. Peter had wanted Dorothy buried, and to spare his feelings, the urn was placed within a full-sized coffin for burial. After the service, Nellie and Burl stood together well away from the gravesite. She couldn't watch the burial. At the gravesite, the others, each in turn, threw a single rose onto the lowered coffin before it was covered with earth. Tears were running down Louise's and John's faces. Hefner put his arms around the both of them and held them tight. There was a wake afterwards at Peter's house, but Hefner was too emotionally drained to attend. The others drank and talked of Dorothy and watched her rushes from They All Laughed in the screening room downstairs. Nellie couldn't watch the film. She and Peter stayed upstairs and talked and cried a little more. The next day, the family had lunch at the Playboy mansion. They toured the grounds. Nellie stood apart from the others in the aviary. She had tears in her eyes, but was smiling. Elizabeth Norris went to her. "I'm so pleased to see the place where Dorothy was so happy," Nellie said. "This is where Dorothy felt safe and really loved." The family flew back to Vancouver. Later, Nellie would fall into a fitful sleep, only to awaken in the middle of the night crying. "Dorothy is dead," she would tell herself in the dark. "Dorothy is dead." She trusted Spider, Nellie thought, and he betrayed her. You want to save your children from so many things, but you can't. God, who knows everything, must know why she was killed. There must be a reason. Oh, you'll drive yourself insane looking for the reason. Sometimes there's no reason. I'm sorry to say. If she had only played the actress with him that afternoon, Nellie thought. Pretended, but she couldn't. She was too honest. Nothing seemed to matter anymore. Nellie listened to other people talk and none of it mattered. Crying, "It should have been me. I would have been glad if it had been me. Dorothy was so young." Back in California, Hefner was remembering Dorothy. He was certain the last 2 years of her life had been the happiest she had ever known. She had been growing at an incredible rate, not only professionally, but as a person. The first decisions she ever had a chance to make for herself were those she made in pursuit of her career and her future after coming to LA. She was just beginning to be a complete human being, escaping from the pain of near poverty and acquiring the ability to take care of herself and her family. Unfortunately, the sickness that was Spider followed her. He used her without concern or compassion for what was best for her. When he couldn't use her anymore, he killed her. That is damn exactly fucking right. For a long time, Hefner had maintained that society's traditional values, secular and religious, were designed to keep women in a state of subjugation. Agreed. Now, finally, women were being liberated, economically, socially, and sexually. They were discovering alternatives, coming into their own. That had been the issue that proved too much for Spider. He couldn't stand to see Dorothy become an independent human being with a mind and will of her own, a body of her own, a life of her own. Bogdanovich threw himself into post-production on They All Laughed, editing the film surrounding himself with images and memories of Dorothy. He chose an epitaph from A Farewell to Arms for the red granite stone that was set on Dorothy's grave. Okay, another reason why I hate Peter Bogdanovich, because he found the world's most depressing Hemingway paragraph to put on her gravestone. You know how I say I like to put roses on graves? Apparently Peter Bogdanovich does not. He likes to put like his own self-pitying bullshit on there. And at the end it says, "We love you, DR," which was his personal nickname for her. And you know, I wasn't there with the family and maybe they were totally cool with that. My grandfather passed away unexpectedly, and there was this huge family fight over what they were going to call him on the gravestone. Everyone in the family had a, familiar name for him, except for this other side of the family, which is kind of this like con man, awful side of the family. And they wanted to call him by their name. And there was this huge fight over it. And fortunately we won, but that is perhaps why I find that such a sticking point. Of course, it wasn't the name that the parents and the sisters and the people who knew her and loved her for a long time, that's not the one that went on the gravestone. It was the one that Peter Bogdanovich personally used for her for the entire, 4 months that they were dating. I am not a fan of PDB, in case you can't tell. So we're not going to read it because it's depressing and stupid, the epitaph. The media continued to show interest in the story of Dorothy Stratten's life and death. Bogdanovich was pressed for interviews. He decided not to give any, at least until They All Laughed was finished and released. He meant the picture to be his own personal tribute to Dorothy. In lieu of interviews, he issued the following statement several weeks after her death. Dorothy Stratten was as gifted and intelligent an actress as she was beautiful, and she was very beautiful indeed, in every way imaginable, most particularly in her heart. She and I fell in love during our picture and had planned to be married as soon as her divorce was final. The loss to her mother and father, her sister and brother, to my children, to her friends, and to me is larger than we can calculate. But there is no life Dorothy's touched that has not been changed for the better through knowing her, however briefly. Dorothy looked at the world with love and believed all people were good down deep. She was mistaken, but it is among the most generous and noble errors we can make. Peter Bogdanovich. Okay, I gotta say, that I agree with. That I find beautiful. Well said, Peter. You scumbag. Playboy people helped Dorothy's family however they could during the difficult weeks that followed the funeral. Elizabeth North sent John Hogue Stratten the Houston Astros shirt and cap given to Dorothy when she threw out the first ball at the Astrodome, and the pictures of Dorothy wearing them. John replied, "Dear Elizabeth, thank you very much for the baseball shirt and the pictures. The shirt fits me perfect. We couldn't find the hat, though, unless Louise doesn't want to give it to me. I am up in Dawson Creek right now. Today was the first day in my course. I haven't seen too much of the town yet, but from the campus, the hills are a golden prairie color and patches of green trees. It's a really beautiful country. It's getting ready for winter now. Last night we had a light snow. At home, things are still the same. Mom is having a hard time accepting what happened, and now with me going away to school. She was very happy that I got the chance, though. I was thinking of sending Hugh Hefner a letter thanking him for all that he's done for us. I wondered if I might send it to you, Elizabeth, and you could forward it. I can imagine all the mail he must get. My letter could sit around for a long time. Well, it's getting late. I'm saying hi from everyone at home as well as myself. We all love you. Take care. Love, John." Nellie was shocked to discover that Spider's family had filed a claim against the assets of Dorothy's estate. It seemed incredible to her that the Spiders intended to benefit financially from the murder of her daughter by one of their own. She called Hefner in a panic. If Dorothy died first, then the Spiders might be able to claim the entire estate, with Dorothy's assets passing to Spider on her death and his next of kin when he killed himself an hour later. In all of this, there must be some justice, Nellie cried. Hefner agreed and promptly hired lawyers to represent Dorothy's family in the fight. Other publications were planning articles about Dorothy, including New York's Village Voice, California's New West, and several U.S. and Canadian newspapers. Hefner met with Teresa Carpenter, who was researching a cover story for The Voice. He was anxious to put to rest the notion that Dorothy died because Playboy or Hollywood exploited her. That appeals to a popular prejudice of our time, Hefner said, but it simply isn't so. Playboy and Hollywood were an escape for Dorothy, from poverty and from the subjugation she suffered in a relationship with a very sick guy. When Spider saw his meal ticket and his connection to power slipping away, he killed her. If Hefner had hoped for an objective reportage from Teresa Carpenter and the Village Voice, he was due for a disappointment. I mostly agree with you, Hefner, in that perspective, but he does get a little self-righteous and grandiose from time to time. It does make me giggle a bit sometimes. Hefner, take it down a notch. He was due for a disappointment. Death of a Playmate proved to be viciously anti-Playboy, anti-male diatribe. I don't know if it was anti-male. It was anti-Playboy though. In which Carpenter linked Spider, Bogdanovich, and Hefner as three of a kind. Since Carpenter had no evidence to support such an assertion regarding Hefner, she simply fabricated facts. His chief preoccupation nowadays is managing the Playmates. Oh, are you sure that didn't just hit a little too close to home, Hef? And invented imaginary motives. Yet with all these beautiful women at his disposal, he had not one Marion Davies to call his own. Dorothy exposed that yearning, that ego weakness. I think that was probably also true. On the other hand, Carpenter perceived Spider to be one of Playboy's most honest apostles. He acted out dark fantasies never intended to be realized. Instead of fondling himself in private, instead of wreaking abstract violence upon a centerfold, he ravaged the playmate in the flesh. Okay, that is the weirdest criticism that I hear all the time against Playboy, that I think that is very telling of Teresa Carpenter's perception of sexuality. Anyone who could see a beautiful naked woman and feel violent, hi Ted Bundy, I think you're the one with a problem, not me. My naked body is not the problem. My being proud of and displaying my naked body is not the problem. Your feelings about my naked body are your problem. So I don't love Teresa Carpenter either. Oh my God. Spider's sin, Carpenter concluded, is his unforgivable sin was being small time. It is an interesting perspective, though. Interesting article Teresa Carpenter wrote. Nellie's response to the Carpenter comparison was contempt. That's not true, she said. Hefner helped Dorothy and the family. She found it beyond belief that people credited Dorothy's success to others, but blamed Dorothy for her own murder. Yep. Nellie saw the accusation in people's eyes, the accusation that her daughter was dead because she appeared in Playboy, because she was a bad girl. Yep. It was yet another cruelty added to the pain of her daughter's death. People say here it was too much for her, Nellie said. Well, she was doing fine. It was too much for Spider. Amen, Nellie. Teresa Carpenter's Death of a Playmate was illustrated with several photographs, including a semi-nude of Dorothy, shot when she was under the age of consent, 19, in Vancouver. That's an interesting thing to add in here. The article, I'm pretty sure those pictures are somewhere in Playboy too, are they not? I don't know. I'm gonna have to look that one up. That's an interesting little sentence to slip in there. Okay. The article was syndicated in newspapers throughout America and abroad. Motion picture rights went to director Bob Fosse for a price reportedly in excess of $125,000. Dorothy's family received no part of those revenues. So much for the exploitation of Dorothy Stratten. Okay, that's a fair point. Dorothy's exceptional beauty, her rapid rise to fame, and her premature, violent death are the stuff that cult figures are made from. Early evidence suggests that a Dorothy Stratten cult may be emerging. In the feature stories following her murder, newspapers referred to Dorothy as a goddess for the 80s, and there were frequent comparisons to the tragic life and death of blonde superstar Marilyn Monroe. I mean, yeah, but you can't be blonde and sexy at all without comparisons to Marilyn Monroe. Back issues of Playboy with photographs of Dorothy were reportedly much in demand in used bookstores. Galaxina premiered in Kansas City on the day Dorothy died. Oh my God. In the weeks that followed, the film was advertising across the country as introducing Dorothy R. Stratten, Playboy's Playmate of the Year. It did unexpectedly strong business at the box office. One young fan, the son of a mansion secretary, explained, "The movie was nothing special, but Dorothy was a queen." The TV docudrama and Bob Fosse film were both referred to in the Hollywood trade papers as hot properties. In a sincere tribute, the rock group Prism recorded a single for Capitol Records called Cover Girl and included in its greatest hits LP, All the Best from Prison, dedicated to Dorothy. 5 years and 18 months. She's got everything all at once. She moved out, that's when he moved in. Cover Girl, it's such a damn waste. You were so much more than a pretty face. I never thought I'd see you again. I never thought I'd never see you again. I saw her picture on the 6 o'clock news. Just read about the Cover Girl blues. Goodbye, my Cover Girl. From the outset, Hefner had been concerned with not exploiting the tragedy. He ordered a reprinting of the cover of the 1981 Playmate calendar, replacing Dorothy's picture with that of another Playmate at a cost of a bunch of money and a delay in the on-sale date of several weeks. He similarly scrapped a Christmas subscription, a Christmas card, and several other promotional pieces that featured pictures of the 1980 Playmate of the Year. Dorothy's final favorite pictorial on the famous blondes of Hollywood was pulled from a holiday issue. It seemed too soon after her death, and the pain of her passing was still acute for too many people at Playboy. The pictorial was rescheduled for the March issue with plans to accompany it with an editorial tribute. But the passage of time didn't dim her memory or the hurt of it, and the pictorial was once again postponed. Instead, Hefner commissioned an in-depth biography for the May 1981 issue, so that Playboys would know and remember Dorothy as she was. It was his way of saying, "We love you, Dorothy." Sometime after the first black weeks of loss and bitterness, Nellie remembered a play Dorothy had talked about on one of her visits to Vancouver. Nellie mentioned the play to Peter, and he sent her a copy. It was Our Town by Thornton Wilder. Dorothy had learned the part of Emily to read at casting calls. Emily grows up in Grosvenor's Corners, marries, dies young in childbirth. Dorothy had loved the role. She told Nellie about it and recited her lines. In the cemetery where she is buried, Emily greets the others of Grosvenor's Corners who have died. She isn't ready to give up life and asks the stage manager who narrates the play to let her go back for a little while. The dead warn her against returning to life. She won't like it, they tell her. It isn't wise. Emily goes anyway, back to her 12th birthday, and reunites with her mother and father, and tries with a mounting urgency simply to make everyone see everyone, to make everyone stop and look. But busy with living, they don't, and Emily calls to the stage manager. I can't go on. It goes so fast. We don't have time to look at one another. Take me back, up the hill, up to my grave. But first, wait. One more look. Nellie read the lines she heard for the first time from her daughter. Goodbye, goodbye, world. Goodbye, Grover's Corners, Mama and Papa. Goodbye to clocks ticking, and Mama's sunflowers, and food and coffee, and new iron dresses and hot baths, and sleeping and waking up. Oh, Earth, you're too wonderful for anybody to realize you. Dorothy had then said to her, Nellie remembered, You know, Mom, if we knew that if we were going to die, let's say tomorrow, God bless us, we'd absorb everything we could in the few hours we had left. Everything. We wouldn't waste time. And that is the end of the Dorothy Stratten story from the May 1981 issue of Playboy. That was really deep and really affecting, and I got upset and I got really happy and I had a whole bunch of emotions, and I imagine that you did too. So thank you so much for going on that journey with me. I love talking about Dorothy Stratten. I love talking about all of my starlets and harlots. There is something particularly special about Dorothy, isn't there? So I will definitely be burning some sage in here because I accidentally said Spider's name a few times, and we definitely don't want to invoke Satan. And I will get back to you next time with another Playboy review. So thank you so much for going on that journey with me, friends and neighbors, and I'll catch you on the flip side. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. And take care of yourselves.